seeking an opening. President Donald Trump says it's time for the United States to get back to work. We're at the White House. Fighting for freedom. A scuffle breaks out among lawmakers in Hong Kong amid the country's pro-democracy push. Welcome back. For the first time in nearly 3 months, the faithful in Italy can attend public masses. And celebrating a saint. Pope Francis honors the 100th anniversary of the birth of one of the most beloved figures in Catholicism. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, May 18th, 2020. Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight, more of America is reopening. President Donald Trump says, keep it going. The Fed says better times are ahead. And one drug company makes an encouraging announcement regarding a vaccine. So, is there finally some light at the end of the tunnel? For more on that, here's White House correspondent Owen Jensen. Owen?
Tracy, you're right. The White House got some encouraging news today. Wall Street responded. This as more of America opens up and scientists race to find a vaccine.
President Donald Trump tweets today, transition to greatness and reopen our country. And more of it is, with more people heading out. Out of the gates, stocks soared after the Federal Reserve Chair expressed optimism the economy may rebound in the second half of the year, although a full recovery is unlikely until there's a vaccine.
We're committed to delivering a vaccine. We're going to put the full power of the U.S. government and our private sector towards getting to a vaccine. But that's one part of a multifactorial response program.
Investors also found comfort as pharmaceutical company Moderna offers hope. Early tests of its experimental vaccine show it creates immune responses that might help prevent infection. Meanwhile,
I haven't been paid in over 2 months.
The economic toll adds up. One doctor says patient visits for his Dallas-based dermatology practice plunged about 85%.
We're literally surviving payroll to payroll to try to pay these employees and to cover my overhead costs.
Hardest hit, New York City is ramping up its ability to test for the coronavirus at more than 150 sites. But with Memorial Day weekend coming up.
So the word is no, not yet, not now.
Leave your beach towel at home.
We are not opening our beaches on Memorial Day. We are not opening our beaches in the near term. It is not safe. It is not the right thing to do in the epicenter of this crisis.
Worldwide, about a dozen vaccine candidates are in the first stages of testing or nearing it. And also, more than 130,000 auto workers went back to the factories today across the U.S., a big sign of improvement for American industry. Tracy?
Okay, thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you, Owen. House Democrats moved quickly to pass a fifth coronavirus stimulus package on Friday, but Republican senators are calling it a non-starter. They are now laying out a much slower timeline for passing another aid bill. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
They certainly are, Tracy. Several high-ranking Senate Republicans tell EWTN that any bill needs to start with liability protections for business owners. They say that's the only way it's going to happen. They also warn that any future packages, if one takes place, will likely not happen until after the Memorial Day recess.
The HEROES bill is passed.
Even before it passed, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's $3 trillion bill was slammed by Senate Republicans.
I come from the world of rainy day funds, operating in the black, being responsible for what future generations are going to be inheriting from your bad behavior. That doesn't seem to be in the vocabulary here.
The Democratic bill includes almost $1 trillion for state and local governments, $412 billion for additional direct payments to individuals, and more than $100 billion for health insurance premiums for the unemployed. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer urges Senate support.
Let's solve the problem right now. What are we going to do for people who are out of work? What are we going to do for people who can't feed their families? What are we going to do for businesses that are going under?
But Republicans say the bill also has funding unrelated to the pandemic, like stimulus checks for illegal immigrants and banking support for marijuana businesses.
The word cannabis appears in the bill 68 times, more times than the word job.
Senator Mike Rounds calls it a, quote, boondoggle of Democratic priorities.
We want to fix the issues in front of us. We want to respond to this pandemic, but we're not going to be using this crisis to accomplish what they could not do through regular legislative channels.
It's important to note that the $3 trillion price tag is more than the 4 previous coronavirus relief bills combined. Now, that huge price tag has caused for some big opposition among GOP lawmakers. Only one Republican lawmaker voted for it in the House. That was Peter King out of New York. But it's important to note that Congressman King is set to retire soon. Tracy.
Correspondent Eric Rosales reporting from Capitol Hill for us. Thank you, Eric. Scuffles broke out in Hong Kong's legislature earlier today when a pro-China politician won a unanimous vote to become chairman of an influential committee. But that was because the pro-democracy legislators didn't vote, and some were even ejected by Chinese security guards.
As you can see, that this is an illegitimate meeting without any support, without any legal grounds, and Chan Kin-po, in fact, exercised illegitimate power, and so we don't count Starry Lee as the chairman of the House Committee.
Several opposition lawmakers were thrown out. The meeting was suspended when one legislator was injured. Pro-democracy leaders are accusing the pro-Beijing faction of overturning all of the existing rules to take control of Hong Kong.
보건 지역국가에 대한 인도적 지원을 확대하고
The president of South Korea is promising $100 million to help in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. President Moon Jae-in participated in a virtual meeting of the World Health Organization today. He says the aid should be shared with countries that have weak health systems. The 73rd World Health Organization's annual assembly takes place today and tomorrow, with dozens of world leaders addressing the conference, including the president of France.
Nous avons besoin de l'OMS pour son rôle.
Emmanuel Macron spoke by video conference and told the World Health Organization that France will be increasing its financial support to the WHO. The French president also promised that if and when a vaccine is discovered, it must be made available worldwide. The U.S. and several other countries wanted Taiwan to be included in this year's assembly, a move which angered China. For the first time in almost 3 months, Catholics in Rome finally attend Mass again. Parishioners are practicing social distancing, wearing gloves and face masks. The reopening of churches in Italy is part of phase 2 of the lockdown. St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican also reopened for the first time. Guards in hazmat suits took temperatures of everyone coming in. Coming up, we remember the life of St. John Paul II on the 100th anniversary of his birth. Pope Francis says St. John Paul II was a man of prayer, close to the faithful, and showed his love and justice and mercy. Today is the 100th anniversary of the modern saint's birth. This morning, the Holy Father celebrated Mass at the tomb of Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Basilica. He reflected on the life of the saint, saying that he always found time to pray and was close to everybody. The Angelicum University in Rome launches a new institute in honor of their alumnus, Pope St. John Paul II. The Institute of Culture will reflect on the modern world in relation to the thought and teaching of John Paul II. Pope Francis blessed the institute in a letter to the university, writing that it will be a fitting place to interpret the important challenges of today's cultures. Father Michał Pulik, rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, commonly known as the Angelicum, joins us now from Rome. Father, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Father, tell us, what is the significance of launching this new institute in the midst of a global pandemic?
Well, we want to remind about the legacy of John Paul II, which is the legacy of hope. And as we all know, it's the invitation to be witnesses of Christ in a very complex and difficult world on the one hand. On the other hand, it's an invitation to be in dialogue with all those who don't share our understanding of the world. So I would say St. Thomas Aquinas, the big patron of our university, and St. John Paul II both invite us to be strong in our faith, in our identity, and help to the world, to discover Christ, and through Christ, the fullness of life. And we need to remind ourselves that we are on the way to discover the fullness of life, even if we have to pass through death and cross and many hardships. So I would say at the end of our way is always the resurrection of Christ, and it's the main Christian message. And St. John Paul II helped us to remind ourselves about it.
You celebrated Mass with the Holy Father this morning. What was that like, and what were the Pope's words to you on this special day?
It was very important for me to see that our project, which should be focused on culture, because we are starting a project of the Institute of Culture with the name of St. John Paul II, has the support of Pope Francis. His letter is very well written, and if I can judge the pontiff's letter, and really inspiring us to see our work in the line of the great tradition of the last pontificates of Paul VI, John Paul II, and he himself wants to support us in this project. He gives us the blessing for what we want to achieve.
Father, before I let you go, can you please tell us, what does St. John Paul II mean to you and also to the Polish people?
I would say that he brought to my country, and I would say to my personal experience, perhaps it's not, it's much more universal, but only my own experience, this experience of accomplished fatherhood which is possible only if it's open to God, if it has its direction in our relationship, or the foundation in our relationship to God. I think that John Paul II, in the world without fathers after 1968, helped us to discover step by step how we can live the accomplished fatherhood, and how we can become in such a way witnesses of Christ.
Well, Father, thank you so much for your time and for your insight. We really appreciate it. Father Michał Pulak, rectors of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me. All the best.
As the world remembers Pope St. John Paul II today, a new book is celebrating his life and holy legacy. 100 Ways John Paul II Changed the World by Catholic author Patrick Nowakowski takes a look at the Pope's accomplishments and his enduring influence. Patrick Nowakowski joins me now on Skype. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Hey, Tracy, great to be with you.
So, Patrick, we know that Pope St. John Paul II is such a revered and beloved figure. What stands out most to you in terms of his legacy?
He was real, loved the human contact and being with people. World Youth Day is one great example. He drew millions and millions of people. He traveled the world. He was seen by more people than anyone who ever existed in human history. But more than that, I think he was very accessible. I met him 5 times, and so many people had the chance to meet him in person. He blessed sick people during his Wednesday audiences. He blessed newlyweds. I happened to be one of the newlyweds with my wife in 2002 to have that great experience. So he just loved for the human person, and his amazing prayer life that just kind of powered everything, like a nuclear reactor that charged everything that he did.
Yeah, just so amazing. Let's talk about the influence that his upbringing had on him. What role do you think that had in molding him and the way that he viewed the world?
Sure, massive influence. His mother died when he was 9 years old. His father took him to the shrine of Yasna Gora, Our Lady of Czestochowa, the Black Madonna. He said, "This is your mother now." And he took Mary as his mother, and his whole life was devoted to Our Lady, knowing that that's the surest path to Jesus. And he taught that through his entire pontificate, throughout his priesthood. His father died when he was just before he turned 21. And he was essentially left orphaned. His friends thought that he would become a great actor, but after his father's passing, his father was a man of deep prayer, and his cause for canonization is now open. But his father really showed him had a regimented prayer life and a very well-disciplined life, and that was really stuck with John Paul his entire life as well.
And Patrick, I know that he was deeply devoted to the Rosary. In 2002, he released an apostolic letter entitled The Rosary of the Virgin Mary. How significant was the Rosary to him and his spiritual life? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it was rare that you would see the Holy Father without a rosary in his hand. There were many amazing images of him holding the rosary during his quiet time. He would go for walks in the Vatican gardens or even on his travels around the world praying the rosary. He suggested to us in that letter that you mentioned that we're missing some mysteries of Jesus' life, his public ministry. He suggested that, and the vast majority of Catholics really embraced it. He also had declared a year of the rosary in 87, 88, and a year of the rosary, a year of Mary, I should say, back in the 80s. So his devotion to Our Lady to the Rosary was through his entire life.
Yeah, and I know he is also remembered for his ability to connect with people and, of course, his gentleness of spirit. You mentioned that you met him on several occasions. Can we talk a little bit more about that and what that experience was like for you?
Sure. I was a young journalist in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, working for the National Shrine of Divine Mercy Marian Helpers Center. And there was a raffle, and I won a trip for two to Cancun. I asked the travel agent if I could change that for a trip to Rome. And that turned into a cascade of events that led me to meeting the Holy Father. The Marians are a Polish order of priests and brothers that were essentially behind the Iron Curtain through the communist era, the Soviet era. And so they had a great connection with the Holy Father and allowed me the privilege of meeting him once. And that turned into 5 separate meetings, 3 private audiences, and 2 in the square, including my nuptial blessing 11 days after I got married in 2002.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experiences with us and talking a little bit more about your book. We really appreciate it. Patrick Nowakowski, author of 100 Ways John Paul II Changed the World. Thanks again, Patrick.
Thanks, Tracy.
The Catholic Bishops' Conference of Poland has launched a social media campaign honoring St. John Paul II. The bishops are asking the faithful to use the hashtag #ThankYouJohnPaul2 and then post pictures or videos to honor the saint's legacy. EWTN founder's mother Angelica met Pope John Paul II several times. Once, she even gave him some information on her network. EWTN was founded back in 1981 when John Paul II was Pope. Pope Francis adds a feast to the church calendar. The feast of St. Maria Faustina Kowalska will be an optional memorial celebrated October 5th. The Polish saint is the inspiration behind the Divine Mercy movement. She was canonized in 2000 by St. John Paul II. Up next, Pope Francis says the Holy Spirit will light the path we should take in this world. We'll explain. Pope Francis reminds the faithful the Holy Spirit will guide our path in this world.
Egli è il dono di Dio, e Dio stesso.
At his Sunday address at the Vatican, the Holy Father reminds us of the words of Christ, who asked us to love others the way he loves us. Pope Francis also says that it is the Holy Spirit who will give us the strength and encouragement to follow that request. As many businesses begin to reopen around the country, others face an uncertain future as the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is still being felt, affecting workers in every industry. Joining me now on Skype to take a look at the ethical considerations for businesses in this new era is Dr. Max Torres, Associate Professor of Business Ethics and Organizational Behavior in the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America. Welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Tracy. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Now, we are seeing a number of iconic American retail stores file for bankruptcy protection as more and more companies are trying to figure out the way forward. For many, that signals more layoffs to come. What does this disruption mean for workers?
Well, obviously, it's never good to be laid off. The questions come into play, I think, the ethical questions at least, as to whether or not it's a legitimate response to an actual pandemic, which obviously these are this is uncharted territory. So the question, I think, is more like what's driving the layoffs. I think it's perfectly reasonable that a number of companies are going under now. They're not doing any business. If you don't do any business, you can't stay open. So, again, obviously this is not good for the people involved. So as long as it's not a type of opportunism, I guess that's what I'd really like to say the most of. I mean, we all know that it's advantageous to get higher productivity, higher efficiency, meaning to get more work from your existing workforce, et cetera, or to reduce your workforce and get more work out of the remaining people. And that's part and parcel of business. But at some point, there's always a danger that in the pursuit of better numbers and better just better operating figures, that some human values get lost in the transition, and there's always a danger of that, And I think the ethical question is to look within and to say, like, what's driving this sort of thing. If one of these companies has to go under, well, they have to go under. That's the nature of business. They don't have enough to stay open. I don't know if I've been too verbose on that or helpful.
No, absolutely. And, we're also hearing reports of large CEO salaries and bonuses. And what do you think that signals to workers who are being asked to sacrifice right now?
Well, obviously, it's a prudential judgment on the part of the CEO. We all prefer that everyone share the burdens together. I think there's a difference as to if the CEO is playing it like, hey, I'm in the same boat as you are, which has happened many times over the last 30, 40 years of this kind of dramatic tension in the American economy, really since the 1980s. And I think to the extent that a CEO is being honest and tells his people or her people where things are and that they're going to share it, well, then fine, then share it. The worst thing that could happen would be, I'm going to share your pain, and then in actuality, you're not sharing the pain. I'm not sure that it's, as a matter of justice, it's called for CEOs to not take pay. But I do think as a matter of prudence, it's something they certainly do want to consider because it does project an image to the whole world that they're not being affected by the things that are affecting other people. I don't think that's a place where most CEOs want to be. I know the one at oh my gosh, I can't pronounce his name, at Travis Kalanick's old company at Uber, has decided to forego his salary. And it sounds very reasonable to me. But again, I'm not sure that justice requires it. I am sure that prudence requires a consideration of it.
Yeah. Megs, I want to ask you this quick question before we let you go. We all know that consumer confidence is really key for all businesses, but certainly it's essential for small businesses. What do you think those small businesses can do to make their customers feel safe and secure and coming back into their stores?
It's a really good question, and it depends on the type of store. Like I belong to a health club, like you belong to a health club, and the requirements for them are going to be pretty high, and the requirements for a small grocery store are going to be pretty high, where people touch things. And, I would say the most important thing I think any business can do right now, just stay in touch with customers to the extent possible. Thankfully, social media, email, whatever, Facebook, however you can reach people, Zoom, or like we're using Skype right now. I think these are important things. It's in our own business. I'm in the education business, if you will. And I hate to put it that way because I'm an educator. But I think it's very important for us to stay in touch with our students, to stay in touch with our parents, to just, we're thinking of them. We're trying to figure out ways. Like, we know this is going to affect them. We know it's going to impact them. We just want them to know we're thinking about them. And I think that would behoove every business at this juncture, stay in contact with the people that you're in this symbiosis of a business relationship with. And I think it's very important presently for them to do that.
Well, Max, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your insight with us. We really appreciate it. Dr. Max Torres, Associate Professor of Business Ethics and Organizational Behavior at the Catholic University of America. Thanks again, Max.
Thank you, Tracy. I hope I've been helpful.
And a reminder, EWTN broadcasts Mass throughout the day. Mass airs at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. We're also airing other special programming, and you can find our schedule at EWTN.com. There you will also find Eucharistic adoration throughout the day. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. We leave you tonight with a look at the hometown of St. John Paul II, who was born 100 years ago today in Poland. The drone footage is from EWTN Poland. Good night and God bless.